when I'm talking or I'm teaching to, cadets, I try to install this tribal mentality where the community are your people, no matter what they look like, what language they speak, no matter, what their ethnicity or religious beliefs or political beliefs are, those are your people, And I always close with, you are guardians of the state and her people, You are not this singular entity by yourself, because everything you do is for the people. Like when you arrest somebody, it doesn't say, Officer Poore against the state. This person has violated something against the state, against the people,
Sure.
So that's one of the biggest facets that I always push is you are for the people. Everything you do as a police officer is for the people. We're stopping you running a red light because we're trying to protect the rest of the people and you. That's kind of the mentality that we try pushing. And then I also bring in, the historical contents, of policing.
Yeah.
Like one of my biggest questions is, who would have ever thought? I usually open up with this. Who would have ever thought? They looked at the black man as the slave, and they looked at the red man as the savage. And I said, and we would hold hands running around in the forest, And you would see the kind of the shock that some of the students have, because it was very, very true. During colonial policeism, where all men are created equal, well, the red man or the Indian, and the black man or the slave wasn't equal. And we all know that, And now you kind of see this big transition where, law enforcement is trying to encompass, the cultural norms, and different races. But the problem is how do you relate to that? My draw to law enforcement was because it was a paramilitary organization. I understood that. I made that connection, But for the most part, I never saw really Hispanic police officers or black police officers or even Native American police officers, And then again, it was just a skill set that I already had that kind of propelled me into that position. But going back to the cadet, there's not one instance where, you will find in a police academy or even instructors that I've been around like, well, we need to treat a particular race this way. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. But with that, there's also the humanity side where, police officers, and I tell people this all the time, our objective is to deal with the worst that society has to offer. And at some certain point in an individual's psychosis, something's going to change, I used to tell my wife all the time, please don't ask me about work.
Yeah.
Don't. She was like, why? Why not? Because I don't want to relive some of those things. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. I don't want to relive some of that trauma or some of those horrible things, or having to visit violence upon somebody. I don't want to relive that,
Right.
And that's kind of sometimes what happens with a police officer, through everything that we saw going on around the nation. You really didn't hear a police officer talking because you really won't. Because again, like a soldier who's gone off to battle, unless he's among other soldiers, he's not going to tell you the realities of warfare.
Right.
He's not going to tell the realities of what human beings. A police officer won't sit there, during breakfast or lunch and say, hey, by the way, I saw this horrible accident. They're not going to tell you that. They kind of keep it all bottled up inside. And they only talk about each other because they won't be judged by other police officers. And so when everything started going around the nation and what was breaking down, I completely understand. Because I saw those things overseas.
Sure.
And I think the biggest caveat is we have forgotten, in my opinion, as police officers, and this goes all the way up to the chain of command, all the way up to the chief of police, city council, goes all the way up to those levels where the community wants police officers to, sit and talk with, let's say, having lunch at gyms, having a cup of coffee. But the hierarchy and the law enforcement chain of command says, hey, you're committing waste, fraud, and abuse by talking to this person. You're on a call. You should be patrolling the streets. So there's a disconnect between the community and the police officer. And it's not because of the police officer's lack of wanting to interact with the public. It's because now we are dealing with things that are put now at executive levels. And I tell cadets all the time, you are entering in a world where law enforcement has never had to deal with terrorism. They never had to deal with mental health. They've always had to deal with the worst crimes.
Sure.
And now we see things that are changing drastically. And how do you prepare somebody in an academy for 6 months to deal with counterterrorism, to deal with some of the drugs that are coming out that are turning people psychotic, to deal with a bunch of people now that we're starting to realize now our community just, some of the mental health issues facing our community. And then on top of that, throw every law that the state of Texas has, throw constitutional law, all that in 6 months. It's overwhelming for some people.
Yeah.
Right. And I usually close with, why would you want to do a job where you can be sued for doing the right thing?
Interesting question.
And I ask them that because I tell them, listen, Shakespeare said it the best, to thy own self be true. Make sure that this is a calling. This has to be a calling, but in the very fibers of your soul, that you are a protector of the community, because you're willing to give your life for the community. But if you're here because you want the badge and the gun and you like the uniform, then you're going to be one of those statistics in law enforcement that we talk about here in the academy. Kind of like the incidents that we're seeing with George Floyd.
Yeah.
You're going to start seeing those. You're going to be one of those statistics, and you're going to see how it rocks the nation, not just the nation, the world.